to start the program with the Pledge of Allegiance, I'm going to ask our first two speakers, our leadership, to come and get into queue. And please join in unison as we recite the pledge. From there, the program will commence. You're starting in 2 minutes. Feel free to. Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, mayors, my name is Tom Cochran, and I've given my life to the mayors of the United States. I'm so proud to do so. Today, we recognize 56 men who risked their life. Most Americans can name a few of them. And that doesn't really matter. Because we gather here today to honor them, this band of brothers, our ancestors, who, without a doubt in my mind, if George Washington had not won that war, they would have been hung. And it's the miracle of God. We heard about Lincoln last night. We must remember George Washington. Without him, we wouldn't be here. So, happy 4th. Oh, hold that.
2nd. Right? Hold that. Happy 12th. They came here in a place which hallowed ground. He was a Virginian. He had 6 fingers. He had 6 fingers. On this hand, no fingers, only a thumb. And his name was Richard Henry Lee. And he was the first person that proposed that we break with King George. He came here not with a sword, not with a musket, not with a pistol. He came here in July, with a resolution. And we know something about resolution. It was the Second Continental Congress. And they came and to vote, and it was a shock, and they were afraid. It was June 7th, and they said, hey, it's just too much. Let's give it a break. And so a month later, they came back and voted on this resolution. On July the 2nd, 250 years ago, we should today recognize that 12 of the 13 colonies voted in favor. And we're reminding all that they were voting on a resolution. It didn't have 35 whereas clauses, it had one badass resolve clause. And this is, we talk about the Declaration, we talk about the Constitution, but the resolution that they voted on July the 2nd, put them in trouble if they got caught, Resolve that those united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. It was on that day, on July the 2nd, that we broke. And thank God for John Adams and Abigail. People used to write letters. Y'all text each other, email each other. I'm still looking for my BlackBerry, but that's okay. But on this day, he wrote to Abigail. On this day, on July 2nd, there should be with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, illuminations, from one end of this continent to the other, from time forward forevermore. He wasn't talking about the 4th of July. He was talking about July 2nd. So the next 2 days, Thomas Jefferson, Mr. Livingston, and a few of them, polished up the Declaration of Independence. But only 2 people signed this thing. It was a vote. They didn't sign anything. It was a vote, and only 2 people signed it, and one was Hancock, and the other was his secretary, Thompson. 2 signatures. They sent it to a local printer named John Dunlap. He printed 200 copies, and he put July the 4th, and that's where we are today. But it wasn't until August the 2nd in 1776 that they signed the Declaration that was mentioned last night in the National Archives. Who were these people? I mentioned a few. One was Josiah Bartlett. He made the West Wing famous, right? He was the first guy to vote. And they say, Mayor Roots, that when he said aye, you could hear him in Chester, Pennsylvania. You know why? Because he couldn't get to the First Continental Congress because the Brits had burned his house down. He was the first man to cast a vote for the first. He was the first man to cast a vote for the resolution. Second man to vote for the independence, and so he was really up front. Now, John Adams was a cranky old man, and but he knew the Southerners. He knew the Southerners were going to drag him in a war, so he decided to scheme and ask Thomas Jefferson to write it, and he also asked Richard Lee to write it. And he wrote to Abigail, He wrote to Abigail, and we had task forces. They had subcommittees. This is what he said. The subcommittee met. Jefferson proposed to make me the drafter. I said, I will not. You should do it. Oh no, said Jefferson. Why will you not? You ought to do it. I will not. Why? What is your reason? The reason first is that you are Virginian, and Virginian ought to be ahead of the game. I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular, Thomas. You are very much otherwise. Reason third is you can write 10 times better than me. So, as I mentioned last night, they all both died on the same day, and when he died, he said, Thomas Jefferson had already died. There are a number of others I want to mention, but one of the most famous ones was Cecil Rite. They had 3 votes for Delaware, and Cecil Rodney had left. We've heard about the Midnight Call here. They called him and said, get your butt back to Philadelphia. And he did. He got on a horse overnight. He rode a horse in the mud. He also had cancer in his face. And he always had a veil over his face. I wonder what the silhouette would look like when he rode all the way. But he rode all night, and he did it in one day, and it usually takes 2 days. So those are the people that stood for something. And the question is today, are we going to stand? Are we going to stand? In 1932, the mayor stood for Roosevelt during the Great Depression. In 1948, they stood with George Marshall to support the Marshall Plan. They stood with Eisenhower to build the roads, interstate highway. In the 1950s, they stood with Eisenhower. In the 60s, John Kennedy came to Hawaii and said, stand with me on civil rights. In the 70s, the ERA, Mayor Jackson, the black mayor of Atlanta, stood with the white mayor of Birmingham and said, we have to pass the ERA. ERA never passed, but we tried to do it. You go down the line. 1980, AIDS epidemic. We stood with C. Everett Koop. Ronald Reagan did not know what AIDS was until Rock Hudson died. So the mayor stood with him, have stood on AIDS. In 2012, we stood with Joe Biden when he said same-sex marriage should happen. And then Obama had come along. So this is what the Conference of Mayors is all about. And the question is, are we going to stand? Today, mayors are being targeted, our money's being held back, the elections, and I've often said, elections should be balloons, buttons, and bumper stickers. Elections should not be masked men with guns. So that's where we are, ladies and gentlemen. In the name of those people who have died in Yorktown, in the name of those people who died in the trenches of World War I, in the name of those people who died at Normandy Beach and Iwo Jima, and all the people that have died fighting for democracy, by God, we've got to stand in support.
He is indeed a walking history book. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for Tom Cochran, CEO and Executive Director of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I want to take this opportunity to sincerely thank the President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria. Please give him a round of applause. Our U.S. Conference of Mayors Vice President and Second Vice President, Lincoln, Nebraska Mayor Lirian Gator Baird, and Columbia, South Carolina Mayor Daniel Rickerman. Thank you for your leadership and making today possible. This morning, we walk through the American story. In just a few blocks, we reflected on our nation's highest ideals. We confronted some of its hardest truths, and we reminded ourselves that history is not simply something that we inherit. It is something we shape as leaders and as doers and as mayors. The U.S. Conference of Mayors, convening mayors representing rural, suburban, and urban America to gather here today so that mayors can celebrate America, truly makes this a very historic moment. Republicans, Democrats, independents, moderates, and progressives. No matter the party or the label, there is one unifying title for us all, and that is, we are the Mayors of America. Yes, it's true, some of us are from big cities and others are from small towns, but all of us provide each other with different perspectives that allows us to grow from being together. We are united by our shared responsibility, and that is to serve the people who place their trust in us. That's the work of leadership, because democracy isn't measured only by what happens in our city halls. It's measured on our blocks, in whether a child feels safe, in whether a family can build a future or a small business to thrive. All of those actions require one essential thing, and that is for government to show up. That's why this gathering matters. I want you to know that Philadelphia is proud to welcome you to America's first city, a city that reminds us where our democracy began. A city that still believes that our best days are ahead, and may today's conversations strengthen old friendships, spark new ideas, and renew our shared commitment to public service. Welcome to Philadelphia, everyone. Let's roll up our sleeves and continue the hard work together. Together, we are one America, a united nation. Thank you.
Oh my God, how did I end up having to speak after Mayor Parker? I accept all your condolences. Mayor Parker, thank you so much for your leadership and for welcoming all of us to Philadelphia, the place where America first dared to imagine a government of, by, and for the people. I want to acknowledge and ask you all to join me in celebrating Comcast for their strong support of our conference and for their generous support of today's events. Thank you to Elizabeth Brennan, Grant Klinsman, Bob Merkin, Bret Perkins, Michelle Singer, and Bobby Yurka for being with us to celebrate today. We appreciate all of your support of our conference. And last, and certainly not least, to my fellow mayors from near and far, thank you for coming and being a part of today's commemoration. As President of the United States Conference of Mayors, I have the awesome privilege of representing leaders from every region, every background, and every political perspective. We surely do not agree on everything, nor should we. Healthy democracies depend on honest disagreement. But every one of us wake up every single morning with the exact same mission: to make life better for the people who have entrusted us with their neighborhoods, with their families, with their future. Because there is no Democratic or Republican way to fill a pothole, repair a bridge, or put up a stop sign. From reducing crime to building more homes, our residents aren't asking for partisanship. They're asking us for progress. They're asking us to solve problems and Every single day, mayors deliver. That is patriotism in its most practical form. It's a quiet, steady patriotism that is rooted not in rhetoric, but in responsibility. It is the belief that our country is worth improving, worth defending, and worth leaving stronger than we found it. As we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the American experiment, we do so at a moment when democracy is being tested around the world and trust in institutions is under strain here at home. But our history reminds us that America's journey has never been a straight line, that ours has never been a perfect union, but yet we have always been a nation that is striving to become a more perfect one. And that work continues every day in our cities. But history often remembers presidents, legislators, and generals, but democracy has always been sustained closer to home. And long before Americans looked to Washington, they first looked to City Hall. They measure our democracy not only by our ideals, but by whether government keeps its promises. Can a family afford a home? Can a child walk safely to school? Can a senior trust that help will arrive when it's needed? And can a resident believe that their voice still matters? That is how democratic institutions earn trust. Not in theory, but in practice. And America's mayors shoulder that responsibility every single day. The founders gave us an extraordinary blueprint for self-government. But blueprints don't build communities. People do. Mayors do. In cities and towns across America, mayors turn our highest ideals into an everyday reality. We create places where opportunity grows, where neighbors belong, and where people can see that government still works for them. That is the story of the United States. A story that has never been written in Washington alone. It has always been written in neighborhoods across this country, one block, one street, one city at a time. So let this 250th anniversary be a celebration of our past, and let it also be a moment for renewal and a commitment to our future. If we continue strengthening trust, expanding opportunity, and fostering belonging in our communities, then we will do more than commemorate 250 years of American democracy. We will help ensure that its promise endures for generations to come. May God bless you, may God bless our mayors, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce a true community advocate who understands that strong cities are the foundation of a strong America. Mr. Bret Perkins, the Senior Vice President of Community Growth and Economic Development for Comcast. Bret, let me turn it over to you.
Years ago, in the heat of a Philadelphia summer, America's founders put forth a radical and unfinished idea that free people could govern themselves. Yes, they were imperfect, and they disagreed fiercely, but they understood a truth that still defines our democracy today. Self-government only works when people are willing to serve something larger than themselves. That is why this gathering of America's mayors in the city where this nation began is such a powerful testament to the durability and the urgency of that promise. Good morning. My mayor would expect more. Good morning. Good morning. On behalf of all of my Comcast colleagues, it is an honor to be here to welcome Mayor Gloria and the mayors from across the country to Philadelphia. We're grateful that you traveled from near and far to mark this occasion with us. Mayor Parker, our hometown mayor, my mayor, thank you for your leadership and for working with Tom Cochran, U.S. Conference of Mayors, to bring this gathering to where America's story began. Your constant refrain, one Philly, a united city, one America, a united nation, would give our founders confidence that their experiment remains in capable hands. And thanks to Scott Stephenson and our friends and a dedicated team at the Museum of American Revolution for welcoming us to this remarkable institution that brings our shared history to life. For Comcast, this is personal. This is home. We're an American company built over more than 60 years from roots that started here in Philadelphia. Our founder, Ralph Roberts, was a child of the Depression, an entrepreneur and the eternal optimist. He carried a simple question through every stage of our growth. What's next? That question belongs in this room because mayors answer that question every day with practical leadership, with American ingenuity, and a commitment to results that people can see and feel. As we mark the 250th anniversary in Philadelphia, it is fitting to hear from one of the country's foremost voices on the Constitution and the American experiment. Professor Akhil Amar has spent his career helping Americans understand not only the text and the history of the founding documents, but the enduring questions they continue to place before each generation. His perspective is especially meaningful in this room, with mayors who put the principles of our founding in practice every day. So, in the city where this experiment began, and in a room filled with leaders responsible for carrying it forward, please join me in welcoming Professor Akhil Amar.
Mayors of America, distinguished guests, fellow Americans. 250 years ago, a quarter of a millennium ago, today, steps from this spot, July 2nd, 1776, America was born. And you've heard, it wasn't the 4th. It was on the 2nd that these united colonies declared that they were, and a right ought to be, free and independent. Okay, so what's the 4th all about? Because your constituents are going to ask you this stuff, and I thought I'd just read you a few chapters. So, Lincoln was shorter. Not this way, but this way. He got to the point. So what was the 4th all about? Giving reasons to each other, to the troops, to a candid world. Yeah, they cared about world opinion. To God, the Supreme Judge of the universe, and to us, their posterity. Reasons for what they were doing. Now, big part of it are the grievances. The things that the king and his pals in Britain had done that were just wrong. They, for example, were imposing taxes and tariffs that elected representatives hadn't agreed to. They were quartering huge bodies of armed troops in major urban centers. They were threatening judicial independence. Read the document. I'm not making this stuff up. But if you read the grievances, you have to read kind of in ascending order. The biggest grievances of all come at the end. War has already started. Lexington conquered, that's a year in the past. 1,000 people have been killed or wounded in Bunkers Hill. Military conflict has begun, and the king is waging war against us. He's not protecting us, he's killing us. Okay, that's already happened. So how can we remain allegiant to him? And he's not listening to us. We've sent all these petitions, and he won't even allow them to be heard. That's what Lynn Miranda is capturing. You know, he's living in his head. Dude, I can't hear you. Da 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 da. He's not. So, and then immediately they have to establish their own governments, state by state, and that also, of course, involves cities. And they're going to have to create governments that don't violate all those rights, that do respect jury trials and judicial independence, and no taxation without representation, and limits on the military domination of civilian authority. Okay? So that's the first step. The American Revolution originally was about self-rule at a local and state level. They weren't imagining one vast indivisible nation, which we're so grateful we have today. That's not quite what they're imagining. Okay, fine, you say. And now I understand the grievances. I understand we needed a longer document to give the reasons, because you just did it on July 4th, but now you're telling everyone why. Telling us why. But what's that all men are created equal stuff all about? Because it didn't have to be there in order to merely declare independence. Okay, and the king actually wasn't violating that quite in the same way that the king and Parliament were violating other things. Well, that's one of the biggest questions of all in America. What are those 5 words all about? Deeply contested. I'm going to give you Lincoln's theory, okay? But other people have different theories, but I'll tell you Lincoln's. And at Gettysburg, of course, he puts those 5 words at the center of the whole darn thing. He's saying that in 1863, and he's saying 87 years ago, 47 years ago, you do the math, 1863 minus 87, and carry the 1. Yeah, we old people, that's how we did it, we had calculated. That takes you to 1776. Not the Constitution, not the Bill of Rights, but the Declaration of Independence. And he ends, 47 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, on July 2nd, actually, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. That's the center, he says. But you didn't need that to declare independence. You didn't. So what's it there for? And I'll tell you a little bit. But now, your constituents are going to say, and Lincoln says, it's there because we're going to be hanged if we lose. We're appealing to the God of battle. We want to be on the right side of the Lord God. And we are acknowledging, actually, this is Lincoln's interpretation, that in a just society, in a truly just society, anywhere in the world, people are born free. No one should be born a slave or born a slave master. That's Lincoln's idea. He says they didn't do it at that moment, but they said that's the truth, and that was going to be their North Star that we were going to have to eventually reach. Other people have different interpretations, but I'm with Mr. Lincoln. You didn't need it to declare independence. You didn't even need it to explain independence. You needed it because we are a moral nation from the beginning, and that's our North Star. Okay? Well, that's an interesting thought. And you say, well, Professor, and your constituents are going to ask you these things. They're going to say, well, what about, and they talk about consent to the government, what about women? So in fact, Abigail is not asking John in that letter for women's suffrage. She was saying, actually, when you understand the history of it, in this new regime, you should not let husbands beat their wives. That's actually, and the women didn't vote in Athens or Sparta or any other, ancient, there were a few in New Jersey, but that's about it. Later on, Elizabeth Cady Stanton is going to say at Seneca Falls, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal, and she's going to ask for women's suffrage. Oh, and it happens, actually, but it takes a while, and if you read this long book, it ends in Philadelphia with women getting the vote. So that's the last paragraph. But that's not what Abigail was quite asking for. And women at the time, white and black, are very supportive of the American Revolution. Okay? And then you say, well, what about Native Americans? Your constituents are going to ask you these questions. And the truth is, some tribes support the American Revolution and some not. Okay? And the French, we fought against them in the French and Indian War, and now they're on our side. And it was the French and Indian War. There were Indians against us in that war, but now some of them are on our side. Wow, that's a complicated story. You got to know it. Your constituents got to know it, and I'll tell you why, because the only thing we have in common as Americans is our history. You need to know this stuff. And you say, okay, well, was it really popular among white Americans? Did they really buy into it? Yes, and here's why. Now, we don't have poll data. You guys are desperate for poll data. You actually want to know. No, I understand. You want to know where your constituents are, and they didn't have, the New York Times polls and Fox polls and all the rest. And other people have that basically said, well, a third supported it, and a third opposed it, a third were indifferent. No, that's lazy thought. I actually give you a better argument about what the numbers actually were in this book. It'll take only a few minutes to read. The words that made us. America is, people are already voting in America, everywhere. Here's the key fact that we know. Almost no elected official in America, and there are elected officials everywhere, supports King George. They almost all support the revolution. That's an interesting fact, because America's already democratic, okay? So it's more than a third, okay? The one guy who actually gets elected through the 1770s and is opposed is actually from this town named Joseph Galloway. But overwhelmingly, every colony turned state, the mayors of America are for the revolution, okay? Oh, you just learned something. No, read the books and you'll learn more. Okay, now, you say, okay, we talked about women a little bit, you talked about white men. See how many people voted? Way more than anyone else, anywhere else in the world ever had. They didn't put the Declaration to a vote, they put the Constitution to a special vote. That's what this We the People is all about in 1787. But 70–80% of white men got to vote at the time. That compared to England after 1833, maybe Great Reforms, 15% of the white men are voting in Britain. After 1833, it's an astonishing democratic culture, and don't let Howard Zinn tell you otherwise. Okay, I'm with the great Gordon Wood. This is a reference to Matt Damon's Good Will Hunting. Okay, so we Americans have more to be proud of, you see, than some of us have been told. Okay, but now, what about slavery? And they didn't eliminate it immediately everywhere. And if you think it's just about Tom Jefferson, you're going to get it wrong, because he never frees his slaves, and he talks a good game but doesn't do it. And Virginia doesn't free its slaves before the Civil War. Right next to him. It's not just him alone. It's America that's doing this. You got John Adams. He's from Massachusetts. And you got Ben Franklin. Have you ever heard of Ben Franklin? Some of you in this town? Okay. And he's from Pennsylvania. And here's the point. The world has... How many of you have heard of 1619? Your constituents have. Okay. When old world slavery comes to America? Yeah, but there was New World slavery already in the Americas. The Native Americans were enslaving each other. There's slavery everywhere in the world, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe. That's why they're called Slavs. Okay? So the world has always had slavery forever. And they've always had the idea of freeing individual slaves, emancipation, manumission. It's in the Old Testament, it's in the New Testament, it's in the movie Ben-Hur, it's in the movie Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. Freeing individual slaves. But where do we get the idea of ending slavery as a system? Not emancipation, but abolition. Where did we get that in the world? Who were the first people in the world to do that, and especially to do it in any democratic way? Do you know the answer? Because you need to, your constituents need to, and some of you are going to say, oh, Britain in 1833. Baloney! This is C-SPAN, I was going to say something else. Britain actually only gets rid of slavery in the West Indies, not in Indian subcontinent, where my answers come from. So no, and that's 1833. The world's first abolition society is formed in a place called Philadelphia in 1775. And right in what we call Independence Hall, Pennsylvania State House, days after July 2nd and July 4th, Ben Franklin, in that very same building, is going to preside over a state constitutional convention that adopts a state constitution. Here's how it begins, the opening words. All men are born free and equal, as in all men are created equal. And Pennsylvania, very soon, within the next few years, embarks on a project to end slavery permanently in Pennsylvania. It's a complicated plan. Welcome to politics, but they're going to end slavery. Guaranteed. And then John Adams presides over a convention in Massachusetts in 1780, and they adopt a constitution, a state constitution, a state and local governments. They do things first. Begins these opening words. All men are born free and equal. Actually, Pennsylvania's all men are born equally free and independent. Same idea. Endings, and Massachusetts uses those words to end slavery immediately. These are the world's first abolition moments, the beginning beginning of a great abolition project. I'm going to be straight with you. Raise your hand if you actually knew that. Okay? Chris did. Read the damn books. Okay? Because you don't know our history. And if you don't, we die as a people. If you don't know, that is the people. Now, it's just beginning. Okay? But states do things first, and other states copy them. And by the time Abraham Lincoln comes along, there are 19 free states. You know how many free colonies there were? 0 in June 1776. So 0 now to 19, when Lincoln gets elected, 19 free states. You need a fugitive slave clause because they're now free states. There didn't used to be free colonies. And of those 19, 15 have state constitutions that say all men are born free and equal, or some version of that. By men, they mean women too, of course, of course, of course. And they're embracing the Declaration, or at least the Northerners are. Southerners have a different take on the thing. I'm giving you Lincoln's vision, and I'm telling you about people like John Quincy Adams, who stands on the shoulders of his father, and on whose shoulders Lincoln stands. And he's the one president who knew both George Washington, he names his firstborn after that. Talk about pressure. George Washington Adams, what a name, and it doesn't well end. You can put too much pressure on our kids, truthfully. But he's the only president who knew George Washington and who knew Abe Lincoln. And oh, I can tell you stories if you read the book. Books, actually, about how he's invited. There's a great building just steps from where we are. It's dedicated to anti-slavery. And they asked John Quincy to speak, and he said, I can't be there because I'm fighting a thing called the gag rule. But he sends a lovely letter saying, it's so great in your city, you're championing, freedom and equality, black and white, male and female. Lucretia Mott's there. She's a great Quakeress from this city. And that building is burned to the ground, intentionally, by an act of arson. The opening week, it's the worst, torching in antebellum America, except for when the Capitol burns to the ground in the War of 1812, because some people didn't want to have free speech about race and slavery. You need to know that history, and that's steps from where we are, actually. So we're WHYY, actually. It's basically that building right there, that spot. Okay. So I'm coming now to, let's just see how I'm doing on time here. Yeah. Okay. So we need, thank you. Don't encourage me. It's like that bumper sticker. Don't vote. It only encourages them. Okay. So here's the biggest point of all. Okay. So these words we're still trying to catch up with them. Wow, all men are created equal. It originally means everyone is born free in a just society. And Lincoln actually says, being born free doesn't mean equal citizenship. And the Lincoln Douglas debates, and he says, and I'm not in favor of Negro voting. He says that in the Lincoln Douglas debate. He grows. And this idea of born equally free will become, which is universal everywhere in the world. When you encounter in the wilderness a horse, you can tame it, make it your own. You can own it. You can't do that to a fellow human being. They're not tameable beasts of the field. We're all in a just society of the same species, God's children born equally free. That's Lincoln's idea. It's universal, mathematical, Euclidean, but that's not the idea quite of equal citizen, because only some of us are Americans as opposed to Canadians or French folk. So the equal citizenship idea is a different one. It's narrower, but it's deeper. And that's the words of the first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which was just ringingly reaffirmed by the Supreme Court, that if you're born on American soil and under an American flag, you're an American citizen. It's not universal. It's a deeper idea. That's narrower. Being a citizen doesn't mean you get to vote. A 2-year-old is a citizen. Women were citizens way before they became voters. So you need to know the story. I've got some stuff to help you with that. We are giving away free books to you all. So how do you go from born equally free to born a citizen, to now born a voter, black or white, eventually the 19th Amendment, born a voter, male or female. But this birth equality idea, wow, it's deep. And its essence is, you shouldn't be exalted or demeaned because of the accidents of your birth. You're equal whether you're born black or white, male or female, Jew or Gentile, in wedlock or out of wedlock. Alexander Hamilton, of course, is famously born out of wedlock. How does a orphan son of a whore? I know this is C-SPAN. Maybe you can even say, how does a bastard orphan son of a whore? Okay, I did it. So, born black or white, male or female, Jew or Gentile, in wedlock or not, or born to citizen parents, or born to non-citizen parents. My parents were not citizens here. So I'm going to tell you a personal story about me, but then I'm going to tell you a story about us, and then I'm going to sit down. Okay, here's the story about me. I'm born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and my parents aren't citizens. They're here legally, they're doctors, they're saving American lives, but I'm an equal citizen because I'm born on American soil and under the flag. And my parents, when I'm 10 years old, bring me to Philadelphia. And I go to Independence Hall. And I'm really inspired. And I think, I want to study the Constitution. And my mom walks me around. My dad is going to the meetings. And she walks me under William Penn's statue. And today, thanks to you, you're putting me up in a hotel, and I'm looking up at William Penn's statue, and right above it, the heavens. My mom passed a few years ago. So this city, you know, and mine is just one person's story. You all have stories. So that's the story of me. Now, how about the story of us? See, because the only thing we have in common, my fellow Americans, is our history, our institutions, our creeds, our commitments, the Declaration of the Constitution. I mean, this is astonishing. A quarter millennium later, look to your left, look to your right. Maybe they wouldn't have predicted that we'd look this way. You know, that someone like me would be up here. Okay? But wow. So here we are. And let me tell you about John Meacham was great yesterday, so was Danielle Allen, so was Colleen. All amazing. And Danielle says, 19th Amendment, biggest democratic moment in history by the numbers. You know, and John Meacham says, really only in 1965 did we begin to become truly multicultural, multiracial. And without LBJ, you don't have a president named Barack Hussein. How the heck did that happen? Here's how it happened. He went to the National Constitution Center and gave a great speech about race in America and said, I'm a tall, skinny lawyer from Illinois, and I know the Constitution too, just like Abe, and I can tell that story. You need to be able to tell that story. You see? Because that's what we have in common. And the bad parts too. You need to tell about slavery and why it took so long for this and that and the other thing. But the only thing we have in common is America. We don't have race. We don't have religion. We don't have region. We don't have party affiliation. We're deeply divided, but we are, Mayor Parker, one united America. That's the idea, but what unites us is the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, our history, our traditions. That's why we need to commemorate, to remember who we are. Just like Jews every year have a Seder to remember we are a people that did this and this and this, that came out of bondage, out of Egypt. So every year, on July 2nd, July 4th, we need to remember actually what happened. Okay, so one more minute. How did we get this National Constitution Center? Do you know the story? Because I do, because I'm one of the founders of it. And here's how it happened, and mayors were part of it. This is hallowed ground, like on access for Independence Hall. What an amazing place. And those of you who were there yesterday, please give it up for the National Constitution Center. And this amazing place, we had it because a Democratic mayor, believe it or not, Philly is a Democratic town, who knew? And a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, who both loved America deeply, worked together with state government as well to make that happen. You know, when stuff happened, I heard mayors are in on it. They make stuff happen, and they make stuff happen, and they work with people of both parties and all races and sexes and colors and creeds. Okay? But I want you to just in conclusion, the point is, we need to know more about our history. We do. We need to know it's July 2nd and not July 4th, and why, what those words, almond, created equal, really mean. So, you know, look to your left, please. You already know this already, but look to your right. Recommit yourselves to each other. You know, we need to commit ourselves to each other, to pledge, you know, our lives, our fortune, our sacred honor to each other. Wow, 250 years ago, today, steps from this spot, it all began, and we get to carry it forward. Thank you very much.
That's such a hard act to follow. We're going to start with the Philadelphia Celebration Choir to like set the mood. Invite them on up to. Are you ready? How's that for a having So I'm Scott Stephenson. I have the great honor to serve as President and CEO of the Museum of the American Revolution. 19 years ago, I got a call to be the third employee to try to get a little audacious startup off the ground, kind of like America 250 years ago. We've been open for 9 years now. Next April will be our 10th anniversary. And we often reflect on 2,000 years ago, Roman statesman Cicero wrote that to remain ignorant of what happened before you were born is to always remain a child.
And so we see our mission in partnership with the National Constitution Center and all the incredible historic sites and institutions in this square mile, America's really most historic square mile. We think of this as really America's first city, with apologies to St. Augustine if you're represented here. It's really the campus of the University of America. It's a place where, fortunately, people still feel drawn to come to this place, like your parents felt. That you had to go to Philadelphia, you have to see Independence Hall, you have to connect with the Keystone City or the Keystone State, where that dream of unity and liberty was really first put down on paper and declared to the world. And so our mission here is to uncover and share all of the amazing, compelling stories about the diverse people, the complex events that sparked America's ongoing experiment in liberty, equality, and self-government. We emphasize the diverse part. We tell a radically inclusive story here. It is the history of our nation, warts and all, but it is also an incredibly uplifting and hopeful story, really focusing on and ensuring that Americans of all ages, and particularly those rising generations, understand our shared history, because it is the only glue that we've ever had to hold us together. That incredible struggle produced a lot of good political slogans. So I'm going to make some product pitches here, because Professor Reed felt like he could push it a little bit. Although you're getting the votes for free, you got to go to the gift shop for these. Unite or die, right? Unite or die. That's an original paper from Philadelphia. They took Benjamin Franklin's Join or Die from 20 years earlier. They kind of updated the sentiment, and they knew the stakes. Because while everyone is here on July 2nd, there were 110 British ships anchored off of Staten Island, and 350 more headed here with, you're not the only one, by the way, that knows Hamilton. 32,000 troops in General Howe's got troops on the border. That was happening, so it was a dangerous moment. The empire was about to strike back. Big time. More product placement. This is a very popular one, right? You can boil a lot of this stuff down. This resonates, and one of our hopes is that Americans reclaim these sentiments from the past, right? This is us. This is the glue. But my real main purpose here is to introduce a true hero at the Museum of the American Revolution. I'm going to have one more T-shirt to introduce my colleague Adrienne. This is not from the revolutionary generation, but from a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian of the American Revolution, Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, who once wrote, "Well-behaved women seldom make history." Now, I will say, Adrienne Whaley is generally a well-behaved woman, except if I hesitate to say yes to anything that she wants to do here. Adrienne has been my colleague since before the museum opened, so she's been here since we were putting together the education program. She leads our education and community engagement efforts here. She is a Philadelphian with very deep roots, and I'm really excited to be able to introduce Adrienne and talk a little bit about the work that we do here at the museum.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. How are we feeling? Yes, I love it. The energy that you all have brought to the museum today is amazing, and I appreciate it. I find myself wondering, why am I, as a museum educator, in front of this group of mayors? What is happening right now? And frankly, after Professor Reed Amar, I'm kind of still wondering, why am I up here? But here's what I figure I can do. I think what I can do is I can pull you all into some of the conversations that I've had the privilege of having with educators over my time here, both in charge of the school programs department within the education department, and then later as the director of education and community engagement here. So Scott mentioned to you that we are a new museum. We still have that new museum smell, although it's hot today, so Might be a little bit different, but that's fine. That's okay. We are still a place that is discovering who we are and sort of settling into our like adult clothing, right? But when we first opened in 2017, we had a lot of folks coming through who were reviewing the institution. They wanted to tell the world about what they'd experienced and whether or not it made sense to come visit the museum, right? They were sort of expressing their views to the world and letting folks know, come here, yes or no. So let me tell you, one of the most popular professional development workshops that we at the museum offer is one on African Americans or people of African descent in the American Revolution. And the way that I begin that PD workshop is actually using a quote that's from one of those reviews from 2017. The reason that I do that is because the reviewer says that by including the stories of women and Native Americans and people of African descent, we are strengthening the history, but we are weakening the symbolic power of the American Revolution. So I dig into that with teachers, like, what is the symbolic power of the American Revolution? What is it that you do in your classrooms when you're sharing this story? What are you hoping to accomplish with your students? How is what you do in your school a part of the American project? And is the symbolic power of the American Revolution something so fragile that including all of the voices of the people who were here and participated in it, something that will destroy that power, right? There's this letter that John Adams writes to Benjamin Rush, which I like to think about when I think of what we might mean when we talk about the symbolic power of the revolution. He says it kind of in jest, but I think it's important for us to grapple with this. So he says to Dr. Benjamin Rush, the history of our revolution will be one continued lie from one end to the other. He says, the essence of the whole will be that Dr. Franklin's electrical rod smoked the earth and outsprung General Washington. That Franklin electrified him with his rod, and thenceforward, these two conducted all the policy negotiations, legislation, and war. Now again, he says that in jest, but think about some of the stories that you've heard of the American Revolution. They're not actually that much more complicated than that, are they? And yet, there's 2.5 million people living in British North America on the eve of the Revolution. And they were not all George Washington, or Benjamin Rush, or John Adams, or Thomas Jefferson, or any of these folks. Is it possible that there is a symbolic power to the story of the American Revolution that includes more of those 2.5 million people, 2.5 million voices, 2.5 million stories? We think the answer is yes. So, for example, Philly's been in the news a lot lately because of the President's House historic site, right? A space that we are very proud of in the city of Philadelphia because it tells a broad and diverse story. Well, we at the museum also have another of General Washington's homes. We have George Washington sleeping in office tent. It's a level below you, right here in the museum, and you can see it on the hour, every day here at the museum. So you should do that before you leave today. But what if, in telling the story of George Washington as a general and as a military hero, what if we also include the fact that William Lee, his enslaved valet, traveled with him essentially every day and every year of the Revolutionary War, and was probably the only other person who could call that tent home? What if we included his story? What if, when we talk about the Boston Tea Party, when around 342 chests of tea are thrown over the side of a ship called the Dartmouth, what if we also talk about the fact that there was another shipment of cargo on that ship, and it was a bunch of original first editions of Phyllis Wheatley's Book of Poems, Religious and Moral? What if we talk about Wheatley's story when we talk about this, right? What if we talk about the opportunities, the struggles, the challenge, and the fortitude of her story in relation to the Sons of Liberty? What if when we talk about America's allies, we not only talk about the French and the Spanish and the Dutch, et cetera, but we also talk about the Oneida Indian Nation, right? And we talk about the decisions that they made as a group, weighing the pros and cons of their involvement, thinking about their needs and their own agency, in addition to what they would bring to the new United States of America. And what if we thought about what happens afterwards first in relation to the treaties that were engaged in between the Oneida Indian Nation and the new United States of America, and how in many ways, those treaties have not been delivered upon. Is there still a symbolic power to the story of the American Revolution that we can lift up if we tell those stories? Again, we think the answer is yes, but a large part of the reason we think the answer is yes is because our guests have told us so. So I brought some examples of what some of our smallest guests have told us. We are lucky enough that sometimes we get thank you cards from students who come to the museum. And sometimes, they just say, thank you, that was so much history and the trip helped us learn more, right? Like, that's learning, that's beautiful. But sometimes they get more specific. So let's just appreciate the artwork on this one, you all, right? This is amazing. It was very fun learning about African Americans, King George and all, exclamation point with a heart. My favorite was the movie theater. I hope you have a wonderful life. Thank you, wait, I have to open this up. Best trip ever. Love that. Let's see, my favorite parts were the Oneida Theater, the ship, and the tent. Once again, thanks for the fantastic trip. But it gets better. Okay, so sometimes you get the pre-formatted letters, and they can do what they want with them. And so this student said, I had a great time seeing the Native American statues and George Washington's 200-year-old tent. Exploring the museum helped me realize that regular people can make a big change in the world as long as they set their mind to it. I learned that people during the Revolutionary War had a much harder life than us. But even though they had a harder life, they worked together and accomplished a lot. I had an amazing time seeing Washington's tent and the amazing lifelike statues. Exploring the museum helped me realize that it doesn't matter what age you are to do great things. Beautiful, right? What about from teachers and from adult guests? One teacher told us to see evidence of women participating in various capacities was a game changer. Truly eye-opening, the exhibit's narrative was unabashedly truthful about our nation's beginnings. The war has ended, but the revolution continues. I appreciate the full orb storytelling, acknowledging the best and the worst of us. Thank you for conveying an honest approach, magnificent and inspiring. And maybe this, it really created a deeper sense of patriotism and appreciation for the revolution leading to our nation's founding. So it seems like it is possible to tell a story that is complicated, that is compelling, that talks about the hypocrisies, the ways in which we fell short, but that also inspires things in people's hearts and in their minds, that they can be a part of an ongoing American revolution and continue to change history for the better. So I think maybe how I'll close is to tell you about a little fun thing that I did a couple of weeks ago. So you might see this on the floor today as you're moving through the museum, that oftentimes either museum staff or some of our contractors will get dressed up in 18th century clothing. And we'll help people learn through first and third person interpretation what life was like in the 18th century and in the Revolutionary era. And I do that too, even though if you had told little Adrienne in college who majored in African American studies that that is the thing she was gonna do, she would not have believed you. But I get dressed up on a pretty regular basis in 18th century clothing to tell the story of Philadelphia's pepper pot soup women, who were free black women, who were entrepreneurs, who ran their businesses on the street, kind of like falafel carts and hot dog stands and things like that, as a way to earn money and maintain their dignity in a time in which it was very difficult to do so. And myself and two young ladies actually dressed up as pepper pot soup ladies a couple of weekends ago for a major arts festival that took place across the city. And in one of the conversations that we had, a woman approached us and said, I was in high school during the bicentennial. And she said that their school, as well as others, had been approached actually by the then mayor of the city to ask if they would participate in the celebrations. And their class, which was predominantly African American students in West Philadelphia, took a vote and declined to participate because they had never seen stories of people of African descent lifted up when it came to the American Revolution. what she said to us as we were standing there in our petticoats and our straw hats and our kerchiefs and everything, she said, if I had known these stories, we would have voted differently because we would have seen ourselves in the story. So I think what I want to leave you with is this idea that we can share these complicated stories. That in this moment where so many people have megaphones and they're using them for all sorts of different purposes, right? And they are shaping changes, political and social, in all of our communities. If they haven't already come to you and used their megaphones, they are going to. And the question is, how are you going to react? I hope that you were inspired by everything that you heard this morning, this afternoon, to feel like there is a story of the revolution that is complicated, dynamic, compelling, diverse, frustrating, upsetting, and uplifting, that says that we can maintain the symbolic power of the revolution as well as maintaining the good history.
Let me just start by saying thank you, thank you, thank you. A special thank you to every speaker, every partner, and every mayor who made today so meaningful. Can we give everyone a round of applause? I do have to quickly run through the people who participated. The Star Spangled Banner, Val gave the Chief Cultural Officer for the city. Thank you. Wait, the Philadelphia Celebration Choir, lift every voice and praise the Lord. And homegrown, headquartered here in the city of Philadelphia, Bret Perkins, Senior Vice President of Community Growth and Economic Development from our Comcast Corporation. Thank you, Bret, thank you, Comcast, for everything. And Professor Akhil Amar, Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science from Yale University. I want my books. I'm ready to do my homework. And then the amazing Dr. R. Scott Stephenson, the President and CEO of the amazing Museum of the American Revolution, and Adrienne Whaley is Director of Education and Community Engagement. Give them all a Listen, let me just close by saying, this morning, it is true, we walked through history. Now, this afternoon, the baton is in our hands. As the 100th mayor of the city of Philadelphia, and the first woman ever elected to serve in this office, at exactly the first woman in 341 years to serve as mayor. Because it took our city more than 340 years to elect this first woman mayor, that's a clear reminder to me that progress doesn't happen because time passes. That's not why progress happens. It happens because people decide that the status quo will no longer be accepted and it is not good enough. Now, I want each of us to remember that's why we were all elected. Not to protect the status quo, but to challenge the status quo in every way imaginable, to solve problems, to bring people together, to make our communities safer, cleaner, greener, and with access to economic opportunity for all. And in talking with each of you, I want you to remember this, America. Mayors from rural, suburban, and urban America, from every party imaginable, we have come together today to say to the nation and to each other that we will never forget who we are. I need every mayor for C-SPAN. Now remember how we practice this, mayors. I want everyone under the sound of my voice to repeat after me, because this is what we aspire to do. Let me hear you say, one Philly. One Philly. A united city. A united city. One America. One America. A united nation. A united nation. Let's do more to visit Philadelphia today. Let it renew our purpose to lead with courage, choose partnership over division, and progress over the status quo. And most of all, let's continue to keep passing the baton. Thank you, U.S. Congress, for convening
Done.